welcome officially to this Sources webinar. My name is Muthu, and thank you so much for joining us. So compliance traditionally has like a little bit of like a bad notion attached to it, because historically it's not always been used in the most positive sense, but every compliance has always existed to protect the consumer. So the intention is good, and it usually always helps in protecting the consumer as well. And the greatest thing you could possibly have when you're asked to get compliant with anything is to have an expert on hand. And that is what this webinar is going to bring you. Sean Slack is an industry superstar. He's a veteran. He's been in furnishing for over 30 years now. And he's also a part of American Society for Testing and Materials for over 23 years now. And I could go on and on, but I think it would be much better if he also introduces himself. So Sean, please join us. I'm going to mute myself.
Been a long-time furniture executive, as you said. I've managed everything from production facilities to sourcing to actually being a partner in a furniture business that was based in Vietnam. I've done sourcing throughout North America and throughout Asia. In the last 25 to 30 years, a lot of my job has been product development and compliance to all of the safety standards. So as was already mentioned, I'm a member of ASTM. I've been a voting member for more than 20 years. And the Sturdy Act, I think, will be a challenge for a lot of factories. It was an issue that a lot of people didn't think was going to become a mandatory rule. And so there are a lot of people that are just not prepared for it. And I've done a lot of consulting recently with factories and with wholesalers and retailers trying to prepare for what needs to be done to get through this transition safely. So the first thing is the Sturdy Act, and how do you plan for compliance? So the law was enacted because the number of injuries happening to young children, particularly children under the age of 6, due to clothing storage units falling on them, has skyrocketed in recent years. There's been a voluntary standard in place for a number of years for this reason. And the US government has decided now to make this voluntary standard the mandatory standard for all furniture sold in the United States. The effective date is 9/1/2023. So basically the production you have right now that would be shipping this summer that you're starting could very well, be required to be in compliance with this new law. The issue really started as manufacturers began to decide to use a full extension drawer guides. And what that did was it opened up the drawers on the clothing storage units more. So you had full access to the drawer, but in doing so, it increased the danger because now you've changed the center of gravity and pulling those drawers all the way out and allowing them all to open at once. And it's become an issue that had to be addressed. So what's included in the new regulation is pretty simple. There are really 3 things that you need to look at. The unit needs to be 27 inches or taller. It must weigh 30 pounds or more, and it must have 3.2 cubic feet or greater of enclosed storage volume. And I'll explain that a little bit. So enclosed storage volume would be anything that's that's in a drawer or behind a set of doors. If it's an open shelf area, that would not be included in the enclosed storage volume. Several people have asked me, well, what if we just change the name of our product from a dresser to a hall chest or to a decorative chest? And it really doesn't matter what you call it, because the criteria is going to be those 3 factors: height, weight, and cubic storage. And whatever you call it really doesn't matter, because the perception of CPSC is that if the consumer would reasonably and rationally expect to use this for clothing storage, then it needs to see whether or not it meets the criteria. If it does not meet any one of these criteria, then it's exempt. So for example, a 32-inch tall chest that only weighs 28 pounds and has the 3.3 cubic feet of enclosed storage space would be exempt because it's under the 30-pound weight criteria. If a piece is only 26 inches tall, it would be exempt. So there's any one of those 3 tests that it does not meet allows the unit to become exempt. So what do you have to worry about if the piece is non-exempt, which means that it falls under the rules of the test or the tip over testing? So the actual requirement is ASTM F2057-23. And this is a testing and safety protocol that's available. You can buy it from ASTM online. and it is specifically for clothing storage units. So any unit that is non-exempt, any unit that falls under this rule, has to pass the testing protocol that's spelled out in this 2057 at a certified third-party testing facility. These testing facilities are available globally. You can go to the CPSC website, and they'll give you a listing of the hundreds of locations that are available around the world. Within the proximity of your factory, there may be multiple testing labs available to you. And that's something that you later on will talk about that you may want to look at. So the first thing is it must pass the tests as spelled out in 2057. The second thing, it must include a warning label. This is a permanent label in an approved format as spelled out in 2057. And again, in a specific location as identified in 2057. And the testing labs will be looking for that. The third part is you must include an anti-tip-over restraint device. And this device has to pass a separate test called ASTM F3096. And what this test does is it confirms that the unit, when this anti-tip-over device is attached to the wall and to the unit, that it actually will prevent the unit from falling over. You have to be careful about this because a lot of people have been including anti-tip-over devices in their production for many years now, but some of those devices don't pass this test. So when you turn in your sample to the testing lab to be tested under 2057, you'll need to turn in the proof of a past test report, which should be available to you from your supplier who's supplying you with the anti-tip-over devices. And then if that piece, if you have that and it passes the test, then you'll end up with a past test report that you can then share with your customers. So what are your customers going to require of you to show that your piece is compliant? You'll need to be able to supply them with a copy of the past test report for the clothing unit that meets the CPSC standards in a certified third-party testing lab. These reports are good for about 12 months. You should have the style number listed on the report. If you offer an item or variations of the exact same item in different colors or with different hardware designs, you should have all of the style numbers listed on one report. There's no need to have a separate testing report for each unique version of a style of a design. Also, very importantly, the report must be in English. The copy of the tip-over device past report must also be included, and that would be shown on your test report for the F2057. This information should be supplied to your wholesalers or importers or retailers. And this information is required to be readily available to the CPSC upon request. So if you don't have it available and you have to, backtrace to find out where the information is, you could be exposing yourself to additional penalties if an investigation of your product were to happen. And in addition to that, you need to remember that should they find a product in violation, they may talk to both the retailer, they may talk to an importer, and they may talk to the original manufacturer. And so they're going to be checking to see that everyone has the correct information and that it all matches. How do I ensure my products will meet the requirements? Well, the first thing you need to be doing is setting up your own in-factory testing. You need to get a copy of the F2057. You need to see how the testing is done in that. You can very easily replicate these in your own factory, and you can start testing to see if, in fact, your products will pass it. An important point to note that if a failure of any part of the product during the test will result in a failed test report. So, for example, if as a part of the testing report, a drawer guide breaks loose, or a back panel comes loose, or any other failure on the unit, then the unit will fail and you'll have to pay to have it tested again. So that's a good important thing for you to be doing, is pre-testing in your own factory before you submit your sample to the third-party testing lab. You can then figure out, as you do this and you start modifying your pieces to assure that they can pass the test, what are the most cost-effective changes that you can make to achieve pass test reports. An issue that I would caution you to be careful about is that a lot of people are adding weights to the bottom of the back of the units. And when you add these weights, it may mean that you need to beef up the construction of your overall unit. And that really depends on where your product starts with. If you start with a more promotional, lighter scale construction unit, you may have to do additional changes to the interior construction of the case. just to be able to handle the additional weight of the weights at the bottom and the back of the unit, because during shipping, you could have damage. And the types of construction changes, as I just said, really vary depending upon where you start at. If your unit starts as a higher end, a larger scale unit, and you've already built in some of the safety protocols into your products, you'll have to make less changes. And you may be able to make no changes and still pass the test. But the ones that are commonly being done right now are increasing the depth of the unit. So if your unit's a 16-inch deep unit, perhaps taking it to 18 inches will help you to pass the test. And it may be that you need to make more than one change in order to do it. It may be a combination of several of these suggestions that allows you to pass. The drawer interlock system, much like what's used in a file cabinet that only allows one drawer to open at a time, that also has its own separate testing protocol under F2057 that makes it easier if you have that mechanism for the unit to pass. So, that's something you really need to take a hard look at to see if that makes sense for you, because it's probably one of the most cost-effective, even though it's not one of the lowest costs methods to change your products. The third idea is to add more weight to the lower back of your unit. Some people are doing it where they don't need a lot of weight and they'll add just a thicker MDF panel to the back. Some people are adding steel plates to the bottom back of the units, and a lot of people are adding concrete weights. There's concrete weights available from suppliers that are actually wrapped in like a plastic fiber material, and then you just screw them into the back of the unit. And this is again where I mentioned to you, adding that extra weight to the bottom back of your unit, you may have to reinforce that section of the cabinet so that it doesn't create shipping damages for you. Reducing the length of your drawer guides. This is always a balancing act because, as I said earlier, you want to have the product still be functional for the consumer. But if you reduce the length of the drawer guides, then the drawers don't extend as far. It doesn't shift the center of gravity during the testing process as much and gives you a better chance of passing. Decreasing the size of the drawer box could be the exact same thing, where the drawer is now not as deep, so therefore it can't extend as far out. But again, it's that balance between functionality and the goal of trying to pass the test that you really have to find that balance. But by having a smaller size drawer box, it may actually, in some cases, on some smaller pieces, allow you to be exempt because you may end up with less than 3.2 cubic feet of storage. Another case, again, relative to drawer guides, is for wood-to-wood drawer guides. There's typically a wooden block or a stopper peg that allows the drawer to only open so far and not completely out of the case. You may be able to shift that position so the drawer can't open as far. Again, it's that same balance with the length of a metal drawer guide or the size of your drawer box. Any one of these combinations could help you. Taking the adjustable levelers off the back legs of the cabinet. That's going to cause the cabinet to tilt back slightly, which again, there's a test as part of the testing protocol where you're being tested for what happens if the front legs are on carpeting, and the carpeting and the padding underneath it, which is very common in the US in a bedroom environment. If it, collapses a little bit, from the weight of the cabinet, well, now all of a sudden your unit's going to be tipping forward. So what they do is they simulate that in the testing with a testing block that's roughly 10 mm. So taking the adjustable levelers off of your case starts off with the back of your case being a little shorter. Another idea is to eliminate the plastic floor glides. The plastic floor glides were put on to prevent damage to floors, and they make it easier to move a piece of furniture. Now, some of your customers may require those because of the exact things I just said. They don't want to be damaging their customers' floors. But eliminating those plastic floor glides, when you have wood against wood or wood against carpeting, it's going to be harder for the piece to shift because it's going to grab against that carpeting more. That may not be an option that's available to everyone, but it's something that may in fact be acceptable to some retailers. Or perhaps changing it to a different type of a glide. Instead of a plastic glide, you use a rubber glide. Another idea that I've seen some people going to recently is decreasing the weight of the drawer fronts, taking and building the drawer fronts so that they're of a hollow board construction. And what that does is it takes the weight out. So again, when you do the test where you extend the drawer and add a weight to the front of it, as required in 2057, the drawer front itself is now lighter. So again, the center of gravity is not changing as much. And probably the last unit that I mentioned earlier with the drawer glides is to actually build your units with a negative incline. And that means you take the back legs and you make it shorter than the front legs. The testing block for the carpet test is roughly 10 mm. So if you make your back leg 10 mm shorter, it's something that's going to be a slight negative incline. The consumer's probably not even going to notice it, but it's going to definitely make it easier for you to pass all the testing protocols. So what should you be doing first? What should you be doing right now? Well, the first thing, obviously, evaluate your current product selection to see which styles are included and which styles are exempt. Begin the in-factory testing of which construction changes are most cost efficient for your facility. Different manufacturing facilities and different product price levels, are going to change which changes in construction method are the most cost efficient for a manufacturer. And I've mentioned this before several times, is if you plan to add weight to the unit, remember to also package test it to confirm that the additional weight will not cause shipping damage. I've seen people that have added weight to the back of the unit without changing construction. And when they put it on a package test, which a lot of their US customers require, and they'll put it on a vibration test, it will literally, that extra weight on the bottom of the back of the unit will cause the unit to tear itself apart during the testing process. And then of course it fails. Start talking to the third-party certified testing labs that are in your area. Because you need to build that relationship for testing. You need to find out what their test cycle is. How far out do they have to book it? I remember back when the carb rules became required and pieces were having to be sent off, there was a backlog in the beginning there of 60, 75 days waiting for testing to be completed. Hopefully that will not be the case here, but you should talk to these third-party testing labs to find out what their time frame for testing is going to be. You may also be able to establish a relationship with them that would, provide, discounted testing pricing. And again, they're also a source of knowledge. They're going to see what other people have done. They're going to, and if you should fail a test, they can probably give you some advice in terms of, how you can, pass the test in the future. Another source of information is your raw material suppliers. They're going to know what other factories changes are being made because of the supplies that they're ordering. That information can help you, to again figure out, is your change the easiest? Is your change the most cost efficient? And will it in fact, be something that allows you to pass the testing process? You're going to need to have a procedure inside your organization to allow your team to easily track and supply required test reports and proof of production dates. You're going to need someone who's checking off to make sure that before a piece goes into production, that you've got a pass test report on it. You don't want to produce an order of 200 or 300 or 500 pieces and then find out 2 weeks into the production cycle that it failed the test. So you're going to want to have that pre-production sample done to the construction standards of production to verify that in fact you're going to be able to meet the 2057 standards. And on your exempt units, this is another thing that you should consider that I know some companies are doing already, is labeling them as Sturdy Act exempt due to being under 30 pounds or whatever the reason is. And what that does is by having this label in the back of the product, the consumer knows that it's exempt, the retailer knows that it's exempt, and the CPSC inspectors know that it's exempt. So they're not going to go into your customer's warehouse or your warehouse in the US and start opening up products and saying, oh, we've got to weigh this, we've got to measure this, because you clearly say this is Sturdy Act exempt, being under 30 pounds. And that will make it easier. And also from your customer's point of view, they're going to want to have that documentation because for CPSC, that same copy of testing reports and production dates, they're going to need that in their records, and they're going to need it on yours. So if something is exempt, they're not going to have that information. So if you've got it marked as exempt, they're going to know that, oh, well, we don't need it because it's exempt. And the last comment I want to make about that is there are some companies that I know that are producing products that are not putting production dates on them. Generally, if it includes a carb, you have to have a production date on it for carb already, which is the kind of California Air Resources Board, and there's the comparable federal standard for that. But some products that are solid wood, people, aren't required to have a production date on it. Now the Sturdy Act will require anything that's a non-exempt product, anything that's covered by the statute, will have to have a production date on it. All of the information I think you need to know to begin to address what happens with converting to the Sturdy Act compliance.
Tom, thank you again. I think this is
You're welcome.
scary, and it can be a scary and like complicated topic, right, to kind of navigate around. And it's been incredibly helpful to have someone like you with us to guide us through it. Thank you so much for this excellent presentation, and thank you so much for sparing time. Big shout out to Sean. Thank you so much. Hope to have you again with us.
Welcome. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.